G'day, I'm Pete, the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012, I retired from the New South Wales Police and moved to beautiful King Island, where I became a homesteader. And I'd like to tell you some of my stories of crime and criminals from that area. What I wanted was the owner of the money, the owner of the business house, is to see if his fingerprints were on the money. And that would give me a pretty good case to charge him with a stealing offence. G'day everybody, thanks again for joining me. We are recording in our old barn today because King Island being what it is, it gets wet during the winter, and getting over to the hut is just a little bit boggy at the moment. Today what I have for you is a number of stories, and the first one is about a stealing that happened. I won't say what kind of business it was because I don't really want to identify the person. That's not really relevant to the story anyway. But it happened at a business house, let's say a business house. So I went to this job, and there was the man that ran the business showed me what had happened, and it was a safe which was in a wall, had been opened and a significant amount of money removed. And so I asked the obvious question, do you have a suspect? And he had that gap when I knew that he had a suspect. And I said, well, who is it? And he gave me a name. But he did it a little bit, you might say, reluctantly, because it wasn't a big business. And I said, well, where's this person now? And he said, well, he didn't show up for work today. So that made me even more suspicious. So what I did, I looked up on our database, and I found out where he lived, and it was in the town where this business was. And I went round to his home, and he lived in just a modest area. And I walked up to walk him through his front yard, and as I instinctively do, and I even still do it now, I can tell you, looked at his car, and the car had, you might say, defective tyres on it, bald. So then I walked up to the door and I knocked on the door, and I think it maybe a young child answered the door, and I said, oh, is your dad home? And then this male come to the door, and I said, are you John Smith? He goes, yeah, I'm John Smith. And I said, look, what do you know about a stealing that happened at XYZ business? He said, oh, I don't know anything about it. And I said, okay. And I knew at that point I had nothing, all I had was suspicions. And I might add that when I looked at his name on our database, it was there for a reason. And he had prior convictions for, let's call them, dishonesty offences. So he clearly wasn't going to admit to anything. And when I was leaving, I said, mate, that car out the front there, and the car was in his front yard, wasn't out on the street, was in his front yard. And I said, mate, that car has got bald tyres on it, and they really need to be replaced before you take that out onto the road. And I further said to him, what I'm going to do an intelligence report on your car, which means that any officer that does a check on your car will immediately know that it has defective tyres. I couldn't do anything about it then and there because it wasn't out on the street. He wasn't committing an offence. But clearly he drove the car routinely. So what I'd already hatched in my mind between seeing the tyres on his car and then speaking to him, I'd hatched a plan in my mind was to make him spend money. Because in this particular place, there was only one business house where you could buy tyres. I then went to this place where they sell tyres and gained the confidence of the owner. And he agreed that if this fellow came in to buy tyres, that he would treat the money carefully and put it aside. I was then going to have that money, seize that money, and have fingerprints taken from it. Now you might be thinking, well, so what, it's got the suspect's fingerprints on it. That's not what I was interested in. What I wanted was the owner of the money, the owner of the business house, is to see if his fingerprints were on the money. And that would give me a pretty good case to charge him with a stealing offence. The only trouble was that I went back to see the business owner, the victim, and he wasn't interested in me taking that action. So the whole, so at that point, the wheels just fell off my plan, which was very disappointing to me. So then we, so you can't always help people, and probably part of the problem that he had was he just didn't want to make waves. That was clearly it. He didn't want to make waves. The next story I have for you was about another stealing offence, and I went to and this time was on a farm, and a farmer was planning on putting up a new fence, rural fencing, where he had star pickets and a lot of wire, and it was stolen. And I had a look, and there was very clear tyre impressions left in not mud, but in the dirt around where the building material was. Now, one of the great things about being in these one-man stations is you can become a detective. And I just found it really interesting and fun to do this sort of stuff. And so because of a hobby that I had, I used to do taxidermy and mounting of heads, goat heads and deer heads. And so for that reason, back at my station, at my home, I had plaster of Paris. Now, plaster of Paris is quite an old sort of fashioned product. You couldn't go into a shop and buy plaster of Paris now. So what I wanted to do was to make an impression of these tyre marks in the dirt. And I already knew that this material, this fencing material, was put onto a trailer, and the impressions that were in the ground were from a trailer. I knew that because in front of that you could see where there was where a vehicle of some sort pulling the trailer had backed up. So I put I think I put maybe there was some corrugated iron I put over these tyre impressions to stop any rain or anything else affecting them. Anyway, I went back to my station, I got the plaster of Paris, and I brought some form work back with me, just small pieces of timber, of boards. And I put those boards around the tyre impressions, and I mixed up the plaster of Paris, and I poured it into these impressions, these marks. I then covered it up again and came back the next morning and uncovered it all, and I had these beautiful impressions in the plaster of Paris of the tyres. And then I knew somebody that part of their business was they used latex. So then I painted layer after layer of latex into that, and from that I was able to pull a perfect impression of the tyres. Now, I never found the person responsible for this stealing, but it was a pretty small area where all this happened, and word would have got out that I had these impressions. And I kept them for a long time, and I carried them with me. And I pulled over lots of trailers, checking their tyres. And even one time I was driving around and I was looking for trailers in people's farmyards or yards, and even one time I went into this fellow's, and I didn't have a search warrant, but I didn't need one because I just drove in there, said, "Mate, I was just wondering if I could have a look at your trailer." And I told him why. There's got to be knowing consent. But as I said, I never found the trailer, but it would have worried the people that I was out looking. And beyond that, people need to have confidence in their police that they'll actually take these matters seriously and have a red hot go at finding the person that did it. Then the last story I have for you is kind of related to this last one. I had an email one day on the police computer that an assistant commissioner was doing a tour of my area, and he was coming to my place because my house and my police station was under the same roof, and he was coming to my place for lunch. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting that I've never met an assistant commissioner, and I thought, I bet most of the people where I'm stationed have never met an assistant commissioner. So I put out the word in my little town that there was a barbecue on at the police residence and a chance to meet this assistant commissioner. And so I think about 30 or 40 people showed up for lunch, and it was a great day. And the assistant commissioner was very impressed that all these people showed up. But what happened was that when he got there, he came into my home, just for a discussion. And up on the wall in my house was one of these goat heads that I'd mounted. And he was rather, you might say, bemused by seeing that and learning of one of my hobbies. And so he came and he met all these people, and then months and months later, the same assistant commissioner was at a training. Well, he was at a training day where I was, and I was in this training room, and let's say there was quite a number of police in there, and the assistant commissioner came into the room and he just to say hello and look around, and there was all these police there, and then he looked through the room. Oh, Pete, he said, "How you going, mate?" "Oh, good, thank you, sir." And when he left, everybody wanted to know, "How do you know him?" And I told them. I should have said that he was my uncle. But anyway, that's the way it all panned out. Anyway, thanks for watching.